Hello everybody, my name is Phil Lewis. I'm the CTO of Pureinsights, and for some time we've been puzzling on how we measure the search relevancy of any given search engine and creating dashboards to make that very visible into the business so they can make educated decisions about what parts of the search they change and what parts of the search are actually working, so they keep those the same. So I'm just going to set the scene a little bit and then give you a little demonstration of our search relevancy scoring dashboards. So we can see that somebody's done a search for a black gel venture, and in this case they're on page 1 of the results, the products essentially, and they've clicked on product number 1 and they've actually gone all the way through to purchasing that item, putting it in the basket and actually purchasing it. So clearly that user experience is pretty good. You know, they've done the search, they've clicked on item number 1 and they've actually bought item number 1. So that's kind of the perfect result if you think about it. In this example, the users had to do a little bit more digging to find the right product. So with the same query, Black Gel Venture, they've navigated to page 2 of the results, they've navigated down into the results, eventually clicked, and ultimately the same result in terms of they've purchased the product. So clearly there's a difference in the experience between the two users. And one way of measuring search relevancy is to just do that in a completely subjective way. Just ask people, see how they get on within the system, and I have no doubt they will tell you of poor quality results when they see them. The window of attention of using that method, of course, is very low. You're only really asking to see problems, and that's kind of okay, but you're not really objectively measuring the quality of the search relevancy as a whole. There are some tools and tricks out there that some organizations use. They use things like golden query engine scoring and various other methodologies. There's at least 20 or 30 different ways of measuring the quality of a search engine, but they're all partially subjective. And what I mean by that is you build a golden query list. So unless all of your queries are in the golden query list, then you're not looking at every query and you're not measuring the success of the search engine from there. So again, your window of attention is relatively low. There is some automation to this, but you still have to build a golden query list. And what we're proposing is that we do this as a completely objective process. So we look at all users' experiences, we look at all queries within the system. There are no bad queries, there are no bad users, and we use all of the information that we have in the query log and click log data that's been captured by the website to measure the search relevancy capability of your search engine. So how do we do that? Well, in this example on the left hand side, we might allocate a score of 1.0 to that click. Just an arbitrary number, could be 10.0, could be 100.0, we're just going to make it up to be 1.0. And on the bottom right hand example, we might allocate a score of 0.3 to that. We know it's not a 1.0 because we have made it worse for the user to find that right product for them, but let's, for argument's sake, just give it a score of 0.3. So to measure this, we typically use a K-factor. As you can see with the very high degrees of K-factor, the grey or silver line that we can see at the top there, we will examine deeply into the result set. And even if a hit is all the way down in hit position 50 or beyond, it will get some score allocated to the overall score of that user's search experience. Whereas if we use lower variants of the K-factor, like the yellow line we can see here, then that stops contributing to the score once we get beyond kind of hit number 20. So we can control the window of attention for the result sets, and each of those results could contribute to the overall score of the search engine from there. So the idea is this. When users start querying within the system, user 1 here has done a search for iPad, user 2 has done a search for camera, and we know that they've clicked somewhere within the hit list, we compute a score based on that K-factor. And as users come into this environment and start executing queries against the system, we just capture those scores and we keep on going, keep on capturing those scores, and use all of this data to compute an average score of the entire search engine. So in this case, we can see we've got an average relevancy score for all users, all users' queries of about 0.53. If you notice, that's not 1, right? 1.0 is where every single response is the right product in position 1 on the result set. So now we've computed what we think of the quality of this particular search engine. Now that's an average, right? So some users will find their products in position 1, some users will find their products that they're desperate to buy in position 100. So now we can start to analyze this data and see who's performing well, who's having a great time with the search engine and who's not having such a great time with that search engine. So maybe we can look at the user scores. So this is where we aggregate just the scores for user 1 and user 2 and user 3 separately. And now we've identified a list of users who are having a torrid time with searching for information, right? User 1 and user 4 and user 8 don't have particularly good scores. And another thing we can do then is we can wrap those users up into regions. So then we can say, do you know what? The USA has a score of, let's say, 0.7. Whereas Europe has a score of 0.5. So therefore your European users are finding it a little bit more difficult to find the right products for them versus the American users. And this is really the power of data-driven metrics. It might be that we want to do scores for products. We've got all of the information to do this. So in this case, somebody who does a search for iPad, on average, gets a good experience. Whereas somebody who does a search for a fan gets a torrid experience, and they don't really buy the products in hit position 1, 2, and 3. So this is now starting to tell us that we may need to focus our attention on some of these queries as well as some of these users we had in the previous column. We may even want to overlap onto that revenue information from these products. So we can see here that if you do a search for iPad, you get a very high score in terms of user satisfaction, essentially, and that consequence in a high revenue stream for that. Whereas if you do a search for fan, it's much, much lower revenue. And you might want to factor in the revenue factor to the scoring factor to understand which of those queries you attack next. Because you might need to make some changes in your product catalog or your data sets, or you might need to do some changes to the underlying search engine so that it boosts results for certain types of fans when the users do these searches. And of course, this is part of a very successful continuous improvement cycle. So the idea is, by adding this capability into your search business processes, we can execute the system for a while. We compute the metrics of that system, as we've just described. Then somebody will come along and start to evaluate those results and deep dive into those results, find out where things are going wrong, hand that information over to maybe a search engineer or your search ops provider, who will then modify the system based on theories and say, oh yeah, okay, maybe we can enhance this, maybe we can enhance that part of the search engine in some shape or form, and then re-execute that system for a little period of time. And the idea is, of course, that you're trying to understand, is the score better today than it was yesterday for all user interactions within the system? And then you can quantitatively measure this improvement that you've made to your search engine by modifying it and modifying configurations from there. And of course, over time, you just want to see that you have a steady improvement. You're never going to go from 0.61 to 1.0 for every single query, certainly not overnight. But the idea is that you can show management and all of the main stakeholders that there is an improvement. So those subjective responses that you sometimes get from users who are mostly negative, you can kind of say, no, we realize that there are still some issues that we need to fix within the search relevancy of the system itself, but for the most part we are, with all of our efforts, making strong strides in terms of the accuracy of the search engine over time. And then just before we run into a little demo, this is how we do it. We have the current live system, and that's obviously executing queries, and it is capturing query log data, it's capturing click log data, We kind of know who the user is sometimes. Sometimes it's an anonymous user, of course. We might know where they are based on their IP address, but if they are a registered user to the website and are buying products and you know who they are, then we can factor in a lot more user information into this to slice and dice with. You might know their role, for example, or you might know the organization that they're buying from. You might know where they are in the world accurately, so we can plot all of that data onto the charts. And of course we would love to know what they're actually buying, so bringing all of this together inside the Pureinsights search relevance scoring framework enables us to generate those charts, as we've seen on the previous slide. There is an interesting additional task that we can do as well, and that is to objectively score a new version or a new configuration of the search engine before you go live, because typically, obviously, it's a production system that's contributing to this. But what we can do is we can take these query logs, click log data items, and then we can run them against an offline environment, something like staging, which has all products. We execute those queries, and what we're looking for is changes to the production system before we go live. And we can generate these charts for this offline data, and then you can see whether we've made a boo-boo, a drop in the relevancy score, and then we can decide not to roll this change out, because this is, this has changed in terms of the search configuration. Somebody's made an idea, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this? You measure it before you roll it out, you roll back, and then you just carry on exactly where you left off at that point. So it's a really interesting way of protecting revenues and protecting your search experience for users by combining these capabilities together in one very visual system. So let's give you a little demonstration of the dashboard in action. So here we've logged into the search relevancy scoring dashboard by Pureinsights, and we can see this is synthesized data, but you can get the general gist of what's going on here. We have about 101,000 queries and clicks within the system. We can see for all queries the median result position is about 7, and we can see over here that we have a histogram of where everybody clicks essentially once they do a search, look at the product information page for the product itself, and ultimately put that into the basket. So we can see we've got some work to do, right? We're down at position 7 for the most part. We do have some successes at position number 1, but we've also got people going all the way down to hit position 22 and beyond to find that information. So the average hit position is about 7.1. Because the way we compute the score, our engine score or our search ranking score is 0.65 for all 101,000 queries, and we can see that we've had a few versions of the software or configuration of the software. This could be an Elasticsearch system, it could be a Coveo system, it could be an Apache Solar system. This solution will work against many different types of search engines. Absolutely search engine agnostic in that sense. And we can see that the overall score when we were on version 1.1 of the search engine configuration for all queries was about 0.55. We then made some steady improvements to the search engine scoring just by rolling out configuration changes within that continuous improvement cycle, and just monitoring what was going on within the system beyond. So we got this score. Okay, so I can start now to look and deep dive into the system itself. We've got all of the queries. These are most important queries coming in from users. These are all our users over here on the left hand side. We can see that some of them belong to organization 3, some of them belong to organization 4. This is slightly a B2B case, but it works equally as well without detailed user information in a B2C space as well. We can see how much revenue has been generated by search, and we can see the frequency of the queries, and again how that overlaps onto the revenue that we get. And this information could steer us towards, this is a very frequently occurring query, it's a problem query, but the revenue is so low, maybe I don't care so much. Whereas this other query down here is being executed not so many times, but the revenue is much, much higher in the sense of what we get from the interactions with those users. So this is an aggregated view of that data right now, but what we can do is we can start to delve very deeply into this data. So for example, I might want to throw away all my internal user search queries. Any given search engine, there's going to be external users who are using it, but internal users who are using it. And maybe they know how to get the best out of the search engine, whereas your real customers don't. So I can navigate to that just by clicking on customer, and now we focus in on the customer view. And it might be that I only want to look at Canadian customers for whatever reason. This is part of my project of the day to understand why Canadian customers are not scoring quite as highly as my other users around the world. So just by clicking on those two items there, we have delved into the system. We've recomputed the ranking score based on that. We've recomputed the revenue generated by that, and we've recomputed all the charts in and around that. So we can see a really good view of that data. We can also see that this histogram is now actually very similar to as it was before. The average hit position has come down a little bit, but the median position is still kind of the same. Okay, so I've got these two filters on. If I scroll down, we can see more data being presented to us. So these are now the queries of when the Canadian users have executed queries within the system itself. The green boxes are the queries themselves, and the red boxes are revenue. And below that, we've also got the engine scores for all of those queries alone. So we can see that it's very up and down. We can see lots and lots. Some users have a very high experience with the system, whereas other users have, or other queries, should I say, experiences have a relatively low experience with the system. So we get all of that detail out live, as it's kind of happening really. These are the top products that people are buying in Canada. There's this histogram that we can see, and we have a whole bunch of other metrics in and around, what filters did they use to buy the products, what sort bys did they use, what were the content types requested from the website, which regions did they come in from, and we're also starting to score all of the individual queries from those Canadian users. Okay, so we get dynamic scores coming out of the system. So these are the lowest scoring queries from Canada. These are the high or the top scoring queries from Canada. What's interesting about this, we can go over 1.0 because a user might do a search for something like this. They click on product number 1, they buy it. They also click on product number 2, they buy it, and they also click on product number 3, and they buy it. That's why the score can go above 1.0 in this example. Obviously, if the score is 0, it means they've executed a search and they have not interacted with the result set at all. There was nothing, even on the first page, that was of interest to them, and therefore they bounced away from that. And that's really good information to understand as well. But of course, because this is a dynamic analytics system, we can negate any of these things, right? So maybe I don't care about customers particularly. Maybe I don't care right now about Canada. Maybe I care about a specific type of query. Okay, so here I can see there's a relatively frequently occurring query, but the revenue is low for that. So let's do a little bit of analysis on that. So I can just click on the query itself. We'll then focus in. There were 490 of these particular queries. Again, we can see the score is about 0.6 on average. The median position is actually lower than the previous. So there's something else going on here, right? The search engine is doing an okay job of finding the right information or the right product for that particular query. So maybe there's something else that we need to look at. Okay. Or maybe I'm interested in people who are buying from specific departments within those organizations, or maybe job roles. Maybe I want to find out what products barbers are buying within my product catalog. So I can apply that filter, and then we can see there's a whole bunch of products that barbers buy specifically. This is synthesized data, so some of this might not make a lot of sense, but it's just there for demonstration purposes. So hopefully you can see that having a dashboard that helps you understand not only what the users are doing within the search environment, but actually objectively scoring that all user search actions within that system, and then actually being able to track whether you're making improvements to the system as part of the continuous improvement cycle is a powerful addition to any search engine configuration and the teams that are managing those search engines behind the scenes. So thanks for your time.